Dawn breaks over the Indian Ocean, but on this morning in 1942, the light feels different, colder, sharper, and heavy with the sense that history is about to pivot in silence. Far from home, in waters already stained by loss, a single Australian destroyer escort cuts through the waves. Her name is HMAS Yarra, a small ship, barely 1,000 tons. But on this day, she will be asked to do the impossible. Quiet reflection. Yarra wasn't built for glory. She wasn't a battleship, or a cruiser, or a ship meant to fight a fleet. She was an escort vessel, designed to protect convoys, not challenge the full strength of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Her job was simple: guard slower ships, rescue survivors, and buy time. But the world was collapsing around her. After the fall of Singapore and the disaster in the Dutch East Indies, the seas were ruled by Japanese warships. Every Allied ship caught in these waters faced almost certain destruction. Yet still, Yarra sailed. Rising tension. On the morning of March 4th, 1942, Yarra found herself escorting a small convoy, the tanker Friesland, the minesweeper MMS-51, and the depot ship Anking. They were slow, they were vulnerable, and they were being hunted. At 6:30 a.m., the horizon erupted with shadows, four shapes, large, cold, unmistakable. A Japanese fleet, including 3 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers, closing fast. Yarra's captain, Lieutenant Commander Robert Rankin, knew immediately what he was facing. Cruisers armed with 8-inch guns, weapons that could tear a destroyer apart in a single hit. Yarra had no chance. None. But running was never an option. Intensifying. Rankin gave one of the most courageous orders in the history of naval warfare. Convoy, scatter. Yarra, lay smoke. Prepare to engage the enemy. A destroyer charging a fleet. As the convoy fled in every direction, Yarra turned toward the Japanese guns. Smoke poured from her funnels, creating a gray curtain to shield the helpless ships behind her. Then she opened fire. A destroyer's small 4-inch guns thundering defiantly against a wall of steel. Rising fast-paced. The Japanese cruisers answered. Their salvos fell like meteors. Water pillars erupted around Yarra, each explosion lifting her off the sea. Still she fired. Still she maneuvered. Still she refused to die. Rankin was killed when a shell tore through the bridge. Command passed to Chief Petty Officer Taylor, who kept Yarra fighting even as the ship burned from bow to stern. Climax, high energy. For 90 minutes, Yarra fought alone, outgunned, outnumbered, outranged, but never outmatched in courage. Her guns kept firing, slower now, each round a final act of defiance. Her smoke saved lives, countless lives, as the convoy struggled to escape. One Japanese officer later wrote that this small destroyer fought like a battleship. But bravery cannot stop shows. A final barrage tore through Yarra's hull. Fire engulfed the decks. The ship rolled, and at 8 a.m. she slipped beneath the sea, still firing as she died. Of her 151 crew, only 13 survived the sinking. Only a handful lived long enough to be rescued. Many clung to wreckage for days. Many never let go. They were sailors far from home. Young men who never expected to become legends. Yet their stand became one of the most extraordinary acts of courage in naval history. Soft, deep. No medals. No headlines. No monuments. For decades, almost no one knew what HMAS Yarra had done. But the men remembered. History remembered. And in time, the world remembered too. Final tone, somber fade. This is the legacy of HMAS Yara, a ship that refused to abandon those that depended on her, a crew that chose duty over survival, and a captain whose last order sent a message that still echoes across the ocean. Convoy, scatter. Yara will fight on. The forgotten battle of HMAS Yara was never truly forgotten. Her courage sails forever.
Like and subscribe to Command History Channel.
On a frozen night in 1942, 200 Allied ships slipped into the Arctic darkness. And for decades, historians asked the same question. How did an entire armada simply vanish? This is the untold story of the convoys the Admiralty feared, the sailors never forgot, and the world tried to bury beneath the ice. This is the night the Arctic swallowed a fleet. The Arctic convoys were the Allies' lifeline to the Soviet Union, a lifeline made of rusted steel, frozen decks, and men who fought not only the enemy, but the sea itself. Temperatures fell to minus 40 degrees. Waves hit with the weight of collapsing buildings. A man who fell overboard lasted less than 90 seconds before the cold seized his lungs. And yet, the convoys sailed. Every single month. By 1942, more than 200 ships, merchant vessels, destroyers, cruisers, escorts, and handfuls of trawlers and submarines had vanished into storms, pack ice, enemy attack, or simply silence. Some were never found. Some left no survivors. Some disappeared in daylight, as if dragged straight under the waves. But none of those losses compared to what came next. Convoy PQ-17 left Iceland in late June 1942. 35 merchant ships, 6 destroyers, 4 corvettes, 2 anti-aircraft ships, and a handful of trawlers and submarines. Every man aboard knew the truth. This convoy was so important that the Germans would throw everything at it. Waiting for them deep in Norway, the battleship Tirpitz, the most feared surface ship in the world. A single appearance from Tirpitz could kill thousands. But the Arctic had its own plans. By day, the sun never truly set. By night, it never truly rose. A world trapped between light and darkness. Fog rolled across the horizon like a living creature. Icebergs drifted silently, pale, towering, unpredictable. Sailors said they felt watched, not by the Luftwaffe overhead, but by the sea itself. And then came the first disappearance. A ship simply gone. No distress call, no explosion, no debris. One moment, a dot on the horizon. The next, nothing. The Admiralty blamed weather. The escorts blamed ice. The sailors blamed something far worse. Luck. On July 4th, 1942, a message flashed from British command. Cruisers are to withdraw. convoy is to scatter. The fear? The tear pits was moving, a ghost in the fjords, a monster in the mist. The convoy, without protection, was now ordered to split apart. Scattered ships meant less risk of losing everything in one strike. But alone in the Arctic, scattering was a death sentence. The German aircraft and U-boats fell upon them like wolves. What followed was the worst convoy massacre of the entire war. The attacks came in waves. Dive bombers streaked from the clouds, their engines shaking the frozen air. U-boats slipped between drifting ice, launching torpedoes that left no splash, only thunder. Ships burned like floating furnaces. Others broke apart in silence, slipping under the black water. But many simply disappeared. No flame, no sound, no wreckage, only empty coordinates and the whisper of the wind. Over 200 Allied vessels across 1942, including the ships lost before and after PQ-17, were claimed by the Arctic routes in these same conditions. Storms, submarines, mines, ice, mechanical failure, and sometimes things no one could explain. Bodies were rarely recovered. Steel vanished beneath drifting pack ice. Logbooks froze shut. Families received telegrams with one chilling line: missing, presumed lost. Yet, in the midst of chaos, there were miracles. The Samuel Chase fought through 12 separate attacks and lived. The tanker Aldersdale burned for hours, yet stayed afloat long enough for her crew to escape. A tiny escort trawler rammed a German torpedo bomber and survived the explosion. These were ordinary sailors standing against impossible odds. Each man aboard knew that the Arctic was killing them faster than the enemy. Frostbite froze fingers to rifles. Boots froze to steel decks. Breath turned to ice inside their beards. But they did not break. And here lies the cruel twist of fate. The tear pits never attacked. The Admiralty scattered the convoy over a ship that never actually sailed toward them. The convoy died running from a shadow. Out of the 35 merchant ships, only 11 reached Russia. It was the worst convoy disaster in Allied naval history. But it was only one chapter in a much bigger story. The story of the 200 ships the Arctic claimed in 1942 alone. Today, the Arctic keeps its secrets. Many of the ships have never been found. Their hulls lie somewhere in the coldest waters on Earth, under mountains of drifting ice. Their crews rest with them. Young men from Britain, America, Canada, Norway, frozen into history. When explorers finally found some of the wrecks decades later, they described them as time capsules, cabins untouched, boots still by the bunks, instruments intact, as if waiting for the crew to return. But they never would. The Arctic convoys kept the Soviet Union alive. They fed a front that held back millions of German troops. They changed the course of the war. And yet, the cost was almost unbearable. The night those 200 ships vanished is more than a tragedy. It is a reminder that some of the greatest battles of World War II were fought in silence, in darkness, in places where no enemy was needed, because the sea itself was deadly enough. To the sailors who froze on the decks, to the gunners who stood their posts in blinding snow, to the captains who guided their ships through storms that swallowed fleets. This story is yours, and tonight we remember you.
Imagine a lone destroyer, lost in the icy chaos of the Norwegian Sea. A ship outnumbered, outgunned, and completely alone. Most captains would run. Most crews would pray. But the men of HMS Glowworm did the opposite. They turned their ship around and charged straight at an entire German task force. This is the unbelievable final stand of Glowworm. A destroyer that refused to die quietly, a captain who chose honor over survival, and a battle so fierce that even the enemy commander begged the British to award him a medal. The story begins on April 8, 1940. HMS Glowworm, a British G-class destroyer, was patrolling near Norway, escorting a group of cruisers during the opening moments of the German invasion. Bad weather rolled in, icy winds, zero visibility. Glowworm became separated from the rest of the fleet. Alone and blind, in waters about to explode into war. In the fog, Glowworm suddenly spotted two German destroyers. The Germans opened fire immediately. Glowworm fired back, a small ship punching far above its weight. But then, something massive appeared through the mist. A shadow. A monster. The German heavy cruiser, Admiral Hipper, more than 10 times Glowworm's size. Glowworm was now staring down one of the most powerful ships in the Kriegsmarine. The Hipper unleashed hell. Shells the size of small cars ripped through the destroyer. Glowworm's captain, Lieutenant Commander Gerard Roop, could have ordered smoke, evasive maneuvers, retreat. Instead, he ordered something no one expected. He told his crew to get as close to the Hipper as possible. The tiny British destroyer sprinted full speed straight toward a ship that could shred it in minutes. Glowworm fired torpedo after torpedo, 5, 6, 8 in total. But the Hipper dodged them all. The destroyer was burning, listing, half the guns silent, water flooding in. Then Captain Roop gave the final command: prepare to ram. Even with the deck in flames, even with men thrown off their feet by explosions, Glowworm charged forward like a wounded animal refusing to fall. The bow of Glowworm smashed into the side of Admiral Hipper, a full-speed collision that tore open the cruiser's armor and sent steel fragments flying hundreds of meters. The impact was so violent, the German sailors thought their ship had hit a mine. Glowworm was fatally wounded. Fire everywhere. Her hull splitting apart. Captain Roop gave the order to abandon ship, but he himself stayed on the bridge until his men were clear. Moments later, Glowworm rolled onto her side and sank beneath the freezing sea. German sailors, stunned by the courage they had just witnessed, risked their own lives to pull British survivors from the water. Among them was Captain Roop, barely conscious, clinging to debris. The German commander, Captain Helmut Hay, was so moved by Roop's bravery that he did something almost unheard of in wartime. He wrote a formal letter through the Red Cross, begging the British Admiralty to award his fallen enemy the Victoria Cross. Roop
became the only British officer in WT2 to receive the Victoria Cross based on the recommendation of his enemy. Today, the wreck of HMS Glowworm rests at the bottom of the Norwegian Sea, but her final charge remains one of the most heroic and heartbreaking stories in all of naval history. A single destroyer against an entire fleet, a captain who chose duty over survival, and an act of courage so immense that even the enemy bowed their heads in respect. The story of Glowworm reminds us, in war, machines may dominate the seas, but it is the courage of ordinary men that defines the tide of history.
Please like and subscribe to Command History channel.
December 26, 1943. The frozen waters of the Arctic echoed with thunder. The German battleship Scharnhorst, pride of the Kriegsmarine, was sailing into its last battle. Within just 90 minutes, it would be gone. Nearly 2,000 sailors would vanish beneath the icy waves, leaving the entire German Navy stunned. The Scharnhorst was a symbol of German naval power. Built for speed and armed with 9/11-inch guns, it was one of the most feared ships of the war. Alongside its sister ship Gneisenau, it had already terrorized Allied convoys in the Atlantic, sinking and scattering merchant ships carrying vital supplies to Britain and the Soviet Union. But by late 1943, the tide of war had shifted. The Allies had grown stronger at sea, and German warships were increasingly hunted. Scharnhorst's mission in December was desperate: intercept and destroy Arctic convoys carrying weapons and supplies to the Soviet Union. If those supplies were stopped, the German High Command believed it could slow down the Red Army's advance. Convoy JW-55B was chosen as the target. It was steaming from Britain toward Murmansk, escorted by heavy protection, including the battleship HMS Duke of York, cruisers, and destroyers. What Scharnhorst's crew did not know was that British intelligence had intercepted German signals. The Royal Navy was waiting for them. On Christmas Day, Scharnhorst set out from Norway with 5 destroyers. But in the vast Arctic storms, the German destroyers lost contact and turned back. Scharnhorst pressed on alone. The stage was set for disaster. At 9:30 in the morning, British cruisers Belfast, Norfolk, and Sheffield intercepted the German battleship in the snow and darkness. Flares lit the sky as the cruisers opened fire. Scharnhorst was hit early, its radar destroyed. Now it was blind in the Arctic night, unable to spot enemies beyond the horizon. Admiral Erich Bay, commanding aboard Scharnhorst, tried to break free. The German battleship raced south at over 30 knots, trying to outrun its pursuers. For hours, it played cat and mouse in the snowstorms. Each time it tried to slip away, the British shadowed it. By the afternoon, the trap closed. HMS Duke of York, armed with 14-inch guns, was waiting directly in Scharnhorst's path. At 4:17 p.m., radar picked up the German battleship. The Royal Navy unleashed its firepower. Shells thundered into Scharnhorst. One struck a boiler room, cutting its speed in half. Now the once fast German battleship was crippled. British cruisers and destroyers moved in, launching torpedoes. Explosions ripped through the hull as Scharnhorst listed and slowed. The battle lasted less than 90 minutes. Scharnhorst fought until the end, firing back even as its decks were burning. But shortly after 7:30 p.m., the final torpedo barrage struck home. The great battleship rolled and sank beneath the freezing Arctic waves. Out of nearly 2,000 men, only 36 survived. Admiral Bay went down with his ship. The destruction of Scharnhorst shocked Germany. One of its most powerful warships had been lost, and with it, the last hope of breaking Allied convoys to the Soviet Union. For the Allies, the victory was decisive. Arctic convoys continued to flow, strengthening the Red Army for its push into Eastern Europe. For Germany, the sinking of Scharnhorst was yet another sign that the war at sea was lost. The battle was over in just 90 minutes, but its impact was enormous, proving that even the most powerful warships could not escape the tightening grip of Allied sea power.
In the frozen fjords of Norway, a silent giant waited. The battleship Tirpitz, pride of the German Kriegsmarine lay hidden beneath a shroud of fog and camouflage. To the Allies, she was more than a ship. She was a phantom, a lurking monster capable of cutting Britain's Atlantic lifeline at any moment. But on one fateful night, that phantom was about to be hunted. The Royal Navy had watched her for months, tracking every move, every puff of smoke from her funnels. They knew that a single sortie by Tirpitz could shatter Arctic convoys carrying vital supplies to the Soviet front. So the Admiralty made a decision. If the beast cannot be trapped, she must be destroyed. And so began one of the most daring operations of the war. An ambush planned not on open seas, but in the icy stillness of Norway's fjords. The Germans had built Tirpitz to avenge the loss of the Bismarck. Heavily armored, bristling with 8 15-inch guns, she was a floating fortress. German admirals called her the Lonely Queen of the North. To them, she was untouchable. But to British intelligence, that arrogance was the opening they needed. In London, a secret team of planners and pilots prepared for an attack unlike any before. The plan: use small carrier-launched aircraft, ferry barracudas, to strike deep into enemy territory. Their target: a battleship weighing over 40,000 tons, protected by mountains, anti-aircraft guns, and thick smoke screens. The odds of success? Almost zero. But the pilots volunteered anyway. They knew that if Tirpitz ever sailed free, thousands of lives could be lost. April 3rd, 1944. Dawn broke over the North Sea. British carriers, victorious and furious, launched their aircraft in waves, engines roaring into the icy wind. Operation Tungsten was underway. The pilots flew low over the waves, hugging radar shadows, their hearts pounding in their chests. Ahead lay Cauford and the sleeping giant. At 8:50 a.m., the calm shattered. The first bombs screamed down through the clouds. Explosions ripped across Tirpitz's deck as armor-piercing bombs tore into her hull. Fire erupted from her gun turrets. The battleship's crew scrambled, blinded by smoke and chaos. British planes dove again and again, each one braving the inferno to strike a second time. For 8 relentless minutes, the fjord became a cauldron of fire and steel. German Admiral Kumitz, standing nearby, could hardly believe the reports. Tirpitz hit multiple times, fires spreading, casualties heavy. The unthinkable had happened. The Royal Navy had reached her. Through the very heart of German defenses, they had delivered a precision strike no one thought possible.
Let's get some rest.
When the smoke cleared, Tirpitz lay crippled. Over 120 men were dead, hundreds wounded. Her massive turrets were twisted, her machinery wrecked, her power gone. The proud Queen of the North had been humbled, ambushed in her own lair. Though the battleship did not sink that day, the psychological blow was immense. From that moment on, Tirpitz was no longer a threat, only a symbol of fear, trapped and bleeding in her fjord. British intelligence kept her under constant surveillance, while German commanders debated whether to risk repairs or abandon her entirely. For months, she would sit motionless, her guns silent, a monument to what British daring could achieve. Later raids would finish the job. In November 1944, the RAF returned with 12,000-pound Towboy bombs. This time the strikes were fatal. The Tirpitz rolled over and sank, taking more than 900 sailors with her. But the beginning of her end had come on that cold April morning, when a handful of British pilots dared to challenge the might of the German fleet. The ambush on Tirpitz was more than a victory of bombs over armor. It was a triumph of will, of men who flew through Arctic storms and enemy fire to silence a threat that haunted nations. And as her wreck rests beneath the cold waters of Norway, the story of that night still echoes, a reminder that in war, even giants can fall, and courage, not steel, decides the outcome. For the German admirals who once believed her invincible, it was a moment of shock and of realization. The age of the great battleship had ended, and the sky now ruled the sea.
October 25th, 1944. 7 American destroyers faced 23 Japanese warships, including Yamato, the largest battleship ever built. In 2 hours, most of those destroyers would be at the bottom of the Pacific. This is the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history. MacArthur had returned to the Philippines. 200,000 American troops were landing on Leyte Island. But Japan had one final card to play, Operation Shogo, a desperate 3-pronged naval attack designed to destroy the invasion fleet. If it succeeded, the war in the Pacific could drag on for years. Admiral Kurita commanded the center force. 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, and 11 destroyers charging toward the undefended landing beaches. Admiral Halsey commanded America's most powerful fleet, the Third Fleet. On October 24th, Japanese Admiral Ozawa sailed south with 4 aircraft carriers as bait. The carriers were nearly empty, stripped of planes. But Halsey didn't know that. He took the bait and steamed north with every battleship and carrier, leaving San Bernardino Strait wide open. At 6:45 a.m. on October 25th, Kurita's massive fleet emerged from the strait. Between them and the defenseless landing beaches stood only Taffy 3, 6 escort carriers and 7 destroyers. The escort carriers were thin-skinned supply ships, never meant for combat. Commander Ernest Evans, aboard USS Johnston, made an impossible decision. His destroyer displaced 2,000 tons. Yamato displaced 72,000 tons. By every rule of naval warfare, Johnston should have retreated. Instead, Evans charged directly at the Japanese fleet alone. His crew thought he'd gone mad. Johnston fired every torpedo, then closed to point-blank range with her 5-inch guns against Yamato's 18-inch monsters. One shell from Yamato could vaporize Johnston. But Evans's suicidal charge bought time. Other destroyers joined the attack. Smokescreens confused the Japanese. Kurita, expecting Halsey's battleships to appear any moment, hesitated. For 2 hours, 7 American destroyers held off 23 Japanese warships. Johnston took hit after hit. At 9:45 a.m., she rolled over and sank. 186 men went down with her. But the invasion fleet was saved. Ironically, Admiral Kurita later wrote, "I believed I was sailing into a trap. The Americans had lured me into their killing zone." But there was no trap, just 7 destroyers and extraordinary courage. The Battle of Samar was just one part of Leyte Gulf. In Surigao Strait, American battleships crossed the T, destroying the Southern force in a classic night battle. In Sibuyan Sea, American aircraft sank Musashi, Yamato's sister ship, with 19 torpedoes and 17 bombs. Off Cape Engano, Halsey finally caught Ozawa's decoy carriers and sank all 4. Over 4 days, Japan lost 4 carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers. 12,500 Japanese sailors died. The Imperial Japanese Navy ceased to exist as a fighting force. Leyte Gulf was the largest naval battle in history,
over 200,000 men fought across 100,000 square miles of ocean. It proved that aircraft carriers, not battleships, now ruled the seas. Yamato and Musashi, the mightiest battleships ever built, were obsolete before they fired a shot. Commander Evans received the Medal of Honor posthumously, the first Native American naval officer so honored. The men of Taffy 3 became legends. Their impossible stand opened the door to the Philippines' liberation and brought America one step closer to Tokyo Bay. Did you or family members serve in the Pacific during World War II? Share their story in the comments below. I read every one. Next week, the hunt for Yamato and the 3,000 men who went down with her in April 1945.
In the final, desperate days of the Second World War, as empires crumbled and the world held its breath for the final act, one ship was entrusted with a secret of unimaginable power. She was the USS Indianapolis, a proud Portland-class heavy cruiser and the flagship of the U.S. Fifth Fleet. For years, she had served with distinction, earning 10 battle stars and surviving everything the enemy could throw at her. But in July of 1945, she was given her most important and most dangerous mission of all. Under a shroud of extreme secrecy at Hunters Point Naval Shipyard in San Francisco, the Indianapolis took on a mysterious cargo. A large wooden crate was loaded under the watchful eyes of armed guards and scientists. Inside were the enriched uranium and key components for a terrible new weapon, codenamed Little Boy. This was the heart of the atomic bomb, and the Indianapolis was tasked with a high-speed, unescorted dash across the Pacific to deliver it to the island of Tinian, the forward base for the B-29 bombers that would carry it to Japan. The ship's captain, Charles McVay, understood the immense weight of his responsibility. Pushing his vessel to its absolute limit, the Indianapolis shattered speed records, crossing the vast expanse of the Pacific in just 10 days. On July 26, the secret cargo was safely delivered. The mission was a flawless success. A sense of relief washed over the crew. With their duty done, they were ordered to sail from Guam to Leyte in the Philippines, to prepare for the expected invasion of the Japanese mainland. The worst, it seemed, was over. But the pride of the fleet was sent on its way alone. In a fatal vortex of miscommunication, bureaucratic oversight, and the extreme secrecy of her previous mission, the Indianapolis was routed through dangerous waters without an escort. Intelligence reports of active Japanese submarines in the area were not passed on to Captain McVay. His request for an escort was denied. The Navy plotting centers responsible for tracking her assumed she had arrived safely. In reality, she was sailing into an ambush. Just after midnight on July 30, 1945, the Japanese submarine I-58, commanded by Mochitsuru Hashimoto, was patrolling that very route. Through his periscope, Hashimoto saw a dark shape approaching. It was a large, fast-moving warship, not zigzagging, perfectly silhouetted by the moonlight. It was the perfect target. He gave the order to fire. A spread of 6 torpedoes sped silently through the dark water. 2 found their mark. The first torpedo blew the bow completely off the Indianapolis, instantly killing dozens of men. The second struck midship, near a fuel tank and powder magazine, resulting in a catastrophic explosion that ripped the ship in half and cut all power. The massive, 10,000-ton cruiser immediately began to list heavily. No distress signal was ever confirmed as having been received. The damage was fatal and the end was swift. The USS Indianapolis, flagship of the fleet, capsized and sank in just 12 minutes. Of the nearly 1,200 men on board, an estimated 900 made it off the burning, sinking wreck and into the dark, oil-slicked water. Their ordeal had just begun. As the sun rose on the first morning, the survivors saw the true horror of their situation. They were alone, scattered across miles of open ocean, with few life rafts and almost no food or water. The ship was gone. The Navy didn't even know she was missing. For the men floating in the vast, empty expanse of the Philippine Sea, rescue was not coming. The days that followed descended into a living nightmare. The relentless tropical sun beat down, blistering their skin and driving them mad with thirst. Many, in their delirium, began to drink the salt water, which only hastened their deaths through severe dehydration and hallucinations. Men who were friends one moment became enemies the next, fighting over imaginary islands or fresh water. At night, the cold set in, and many died of hypothermia, slipping away silently in the darkness. And then came the sharks. Attracted by the explosions and the blood in the water, swarms of oceanic whitetips, among the most aggressive predators in the ocean, began to circle the survivors. At first, they took the dead, but soon they began attacking the living, striking from below with terrifying speed. The men formed circles, trying to watch every direction, kicking and shouting to ward them off, but it was a losing battle. For 4 days and 5 nights, the survivors fought against the sun, the salt, the madness, and the constant, circling terror in the water below. They were invisible to the world, slowly being erased from existence. On the 4th day, August 2nd, the miracle they had prayed for arrived by sheer chance. Lieutenant Wilbur Chuck Gwynn, piloting a PV-1 Ventura bomber on a routine anti-submarine patrol, was flying off course due to a faulty antenna. Looking down, he spotted a long oil slick. Thinking it came from a damaged submarine, he descended to investigate. What he saw was impossible: heads bobbing in the water. Hundreds of them. Realizing he had stumbled upon a massive group of survivors, Gwynn immediately broke radio silence, reporting his position and calling for immediate assistance. He dropped his survival gear, but it was a mere drop in an ocean of need. Hearing the call, another pilot, Lieutenant Adrian Marks, flying a PBY Catalina seaplane, raced to the scene. Seeing the sharks attacking the men below, Marks defied standing orders and made a harrowing open ocean landing in rough seas. He and his crew began taxiing among the survivors, pulling the weakest and most injured from the water, strapping them to the wings when the fuselage was full. Mark's heroic act lit the way. That night, the first rescue ship, the USS Cecil J. Doyle, arrived on the scene. Its captain, navigating in darkness, pointed his largest searchlight straight into the sky to act as a beacon of hope for the scattered men. One by one, the living was pulled from the water. But for most, it was too late. Of the nearly 900 men who survived the sinking, only 316 were rescued alive. It remains the United States Navy's single greatest loss of life at sea from a single ship. In the aftermath, seeking a scapegoat for the disaster, the Navy made a controversial decision. They court-martialed Captain Charles McVay for hazarding his ship by failing to sail a zigzag course. In a bizarre and unprecedented move, they even brought the Japanese submarine commander, Hashimoto, to testify against him. McVay was convicted, a stain on his otherwise distinguished career. Though his sentence was later remitted, he lived with the blame for the rest of his life, eventually taking his own life in 1968. For decades, the survivors of the Indianapolis fought to clear their captain's name. Finally, in the year 2000, through an act of the U.S. Congress, Captain McVay was posthumously and fully exonerated. The story of the USS Indianapolis is a haunting legacy of supreme sacrifice, unimaginable horror, and incredible survival. It is a testament to the endurance of the human spirit, and a somber reminder of the brutal.
It was a ghost, a legend whispered among sailors, the largest, most powerful battleship ever built.
A steel monster of 72,000 tons. They called it unsinkable.
But on its final day, the pride of an empire would face a new kind of warfare, and the unsinkable would be sent to the bottom of the sea. April 1945. The war was lost for Japan. The final battle was for Okinawa.
In a last, desperate act of defiance, a plan was forged. Operation Tengo.
The mission was a suicide run. Yamato would sail to Okinawa with no air cover and just enough fuel for a one-way trip.
Its goal, to beach itself and become an unsinkable shore battery, fighting until the last shell was fired. On April 6th, the world's mightiest battleship sailed to its doom.
But she was not sailing unseen. American submarines spotted the fleet almost immediately.
Word was relayed to the U.S. Fifth Fleet. A massive aerial strike was prepared.
Nearly 400 aircraft were launched from 11 different carriers. Morning of April 7th. The sky was clear. Too clear.
Just after midday, the horizon buzzed. The hunt was over. The attack was about to begin. The first wave focused on isolating the Giant, attacking the escorting destroyer and cruiser. Yamato's defenses were formidable. A blizzard of steel erupted from its decks. But the American pilots were relentless, pressing their attacks through the flak. The first torpedoes struck the port side, beginning a slow, irreversible list. The attackers knew her weakness. By focusing on one side, they could capsize her. Then came the dive bombers. Armor-piercing bombs rained down. They targeted the bridge, the secondary guns, and the anti-aircraft crews, tearing the ship apart piece by piece. On board, chaos reigned. Damage control teams fought a losing battle against the fires and flooding. Her colossal main guns, designed to kill other battleships, never fired a single shell at the enemy. Wave after wave struck. For 2 hours, the Yamato absorbed punishment that would have sunk any other vessel.
But she was dying. The portside flooding was out of control.
An attempt to counterflood the starboard engine rooms was too little, too late.
The final order was given.
Slowly at first, then with horrifying speed, the 72,000-ton behemoth began to capsize.
The end was now seconds away.
As she rolled, the shells for her main guns shifted inside the forward magazine,
igniting one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history. The explosion was seen and felt over 100 miles away.
In an instant, the battleship Yamato vanished from the face of the earth. Of her crew of over 3,300 men, less than 300 survived.
Today, she lies in 2 pieces, over 1,000 feet beneath the waves.
A silent monument to the end of an era.
The age of the battleship, defeated by the power of the aircraft carrier.
A testament to the courage of her crew, and a brutal lesson in the changing tides of war.
In the final desperate days of World War II, when Japan's empire was collapsing and the Pacific burned from horizon to horizon, the ocean itself became a graveyard. On a single night in 1945, an entire fleet vanished, consumed by fire, steel, and silence. This is the story of that night, the night the ocean turned red. April 6, 1945. Tokyo receives word that American forces have landed on Okinawa, the last barrier before the Japanese homeland. Inside the Imperial Navy headquarters, a handful of admirals stare at a map already stained by defeat. Oil reserves are nearly gone. The skies belong to the Americans. And yet, one final order is given. Operation 10 Go, a mission with no hope of return. The battleship Yamato, the pride of Japan, will sail for Okinawa, to beach herself, fight until destroyed, and serve as a fortress of steel until the last shell is fired. For the men aboard, it will be a one-way journey. No fuel for the return. No illusions of survival. Only honor and fate. The Yamato was unlike any ship the world had ever seen. 70,000 tons of armor, 9 massive guns, each capable of firing a shell heavier than a car. Her deck was a floating city, her spirit a symbol of imperial pride. But by 1945, she was already a relic. The age of the battleship was ending. The aircraft carrier had taken command of the sea. And yet, Japan sent her forth, not as a weapon, but as a sacrifice. As her engines roared to life in the inland sea, sailors bowed toward the rising sun, knowing they would never see their homes again. Families waved from the shore. Some wept. Others saluted in silence. The great ship slid into open water, and destiny began its count. Far above the Pacific, American reconnaissance planes spotted her almost immediately. The U.S. Navy had been waiting for such a move. Within hours, over 300 aircraft prepared to strike. For them, it was not a battle. It was an execution. Yet even among the pilots, there was awe. The Yamato was a legend, a monster of the sea, steaming straight into hell with her flag still raised. The Americans knew, when they found her, they'd be facing the last heartbeat of Japan's Navy. At dawn, on April 7th, the sea was calm, unnaturally calm. The horizon shimmered with mist. On the bridge of the Yamato, Captain Aruga gazed into the pale light, silent, calm, resolved. Below deck, the crew prayed at small shrines, folded paper cranes, or wrote final letters they would never send. One sailor simply wrote, "If I die, let it be for Japan. If I live, let it be for peace." At 10 a.m., radar screens lit up. The storm had come. The first wave of American aircraft appeared like black dots in the distance, then dozens more, then hundreds. Dive bombers, torpedo planes, and fighters roared from the clouds. The sea erupted. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire, shredding the sky with tracer rounds. Shells exploded so close they rattled bones. The air filled with smoke, fire, and screaming metal. The Yamato's guns shot down several attackers, but it made no difference. For every plane that fell, 10 more took its place. The ship that once ruled the ocean was now surrounded, hunted from every direction. At 12:20 p.m., a torpedo slammed into her side, then another and another. The Yamato began to list heavily to port. Damage crews fought to contain the flooding, but the ship was dying. Bombs tore through the deck. A firestorm raced through ammunition stores. Inside, sailors suffocated in smoke-filled corridors. Others were thrown into the sea as the deck tilted violently. Still, the captain refused to leave the bridge. He stood at his post, soaked in oil and blood, until the final blast came. At 2:23 p.m., the Yamato's magazines detonated. The explosion was so vast it was seen 120 miles away. A mushroom cloud rose from the ocean, a ghostly mirror of what would soon come to Hiroshima. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained but burning oil and drifting bodies. 3,000 men gone in an instant. For hours the sea burned. Waves rolled through the wreckage, carrying letters, helmets, and photographs. Some sailors clung to debris, staring into the horizon that would never bring rescue. American pilots circled overhead, watching in stunned silence. One later wrote, "I felt no victory, only the weight of what we had done." By nightfall, the fire faded, and the ocean returned to stillness. But beneath the waves lay the twisted skeleton of an empire, the greatest battleship ever built, now a tomb. In Tokyo, word of the loss reached the emperor's court in fragments. Admirals bowed their heads. No one spoke. The last great fleet was gone. From that moment, Japan's navy ceased to exist as a fighting force. The emperor's last sword had broken. 4 months later, the atomic bombs would fall. The emperor's voice would echo through radio static. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage, and the land of the rising sun would surrender. Today, the Yamato rests 1,200 feet beneath the waves of the East China Sea. Her hull is split in two, her guns twisted, her flag long dissolved. But divers who visit her wreck say the ocean still whispers. The silence feels alive, as if the ship remembers. For historians, the Yamato is a symbol of courage and futility. For Japan, she is both pride and pain. And for the world, she stands as a reminder: no empire, no weapon, and no power can stand forever against the tide of change. On that April night, the ocean turned red, not from hatred, but from the ending of an era. The age of steel giants gave way to the age of the skies. And as the fires faded, the Pacific swallowed its dead, keeping their secrets in the cold. History remembers their war, but the sea remembers their silence. If you found this story powerful, remember to like, subscribe, and share, because history deserves to be told, one forgotten battle at a time. This is Command History. Until next time.
In the black dawn of October 25th, 1944, 300 American sailors looked out across a gray and boiling sea and saw something no destroyer crew should ever see: an entire Japanese fleet. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, guns the size of railway cars. And in that moment, a single 2,100-ton destroyer, the USS Johnston, turned toward them and began a charge nobody ordered and nobody believed could succeed. This is the story of a crew that outfought giants and a captain who refused to let his men die running. The last stand of the USS Johnston. Before sunrise off Samar, the small American escort carriers of Taffy 3 believed they were safe. They were support ships, lightly armed, lightly protected, never meant to face battleships. But Admiral Kurita's center force had slipped through the northern straits. 7 cruisers, 11 destroyers, and the monsters, the battleship Yamato and her sisters, the largest battleships ever built. Taffy 3 had nothing close, just 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts, against a fleet that outweighed them by over 200,000 tons. Aboard the destroyer USS Johnston, Captain Ernest Evans understood instantly. If they ran, the carriers would be cut apart. Thousands would die.
So without waiting for orders, he turned his ship directly at the Japanese line. Full head, make smoke, prepared torpedoes. A 2,100-ton destroyer charging battleships 20 times its size. Johnston opened fire at 10 miles, her 5-inch guns hammering the lead cruiser. She fired 10 torpedoes and turned through sheets of incoming fire. Shells big enough to tear a room-sized hole into steel slammed around her. One ripped open the forward deck. Another disabled her engines. But Johnston kept charging. Her torpedoes struck the heavy cruiser Kumano, tearing off the ship's bow and forcing her out of the fight. It was the first time that morning the Japanese commanders hesitated. A single destroyer had just crippled a cruiser. For the next hour and a half, Johnston fought like a ship 3 times its size. It darted back and forth, laying smoke, firing its 5-inch guns until the barrels warped and blasting away at anything that moved. Captain Evans stood on the open bridge, his left hand bandaged from shrapnel, calmly giving orders under a rain of steel. Every time a cruiser tried to move in on the American carriers, Johnston appeared, a ghost in the smoke, firing, turning, charging again. But no destroyer can fight forever against a fleet. Japanese shells finally tore through the engine room. Fire swept the decks. The ship slowed, then stopped. Her guns fell silent, one by one. Captain Evans ordered the crew to abandon ship, but he stayed on the bridge, still giving orders, still directing survivors into the water. At 10:10 a.m., the USS Johnston rolled to port and slipped beneath the waves. Of the 327 men aboard, 186 survived the sinking. Only 141 would live to be rescued. Captain Ernest Evans was never seen again. He became the first Native American officer in U.S. Navy history to receive the Medal of Honor. And Taffy III, inspired by Johnston's charge, fought with such insane courage that the Japanese fleet believed they were facing full-size American warships and retreated. A single destroyer helped drive off one of the most powerful naval forces ever assembled. 300 men, one captain who refused to turn away, and a ship that stood against a fleet. This was the last stand of the USS Johnston, a moment when courage outweighed steel, and 300 sailors changed the course of a battle by choosing to fight the impossible.